I found the hospital bed my sister had been using for her cancer recovery, hidden behind Christmas decorations in my garage, except it was a theater prop with fake IV stands and plastic monitoring equipment. The words echo in my mind as I stare at the evidence that shatters 18 months of sacrifice and devotion. I'm sitting on the concrete garage floor of the house I just sold to fund Marlene's treatment, surrounded by the fake medical equipment that convinced me to liquidate my entire life savings. The ice spreads through my chest, numbing my arms as I grip the edge of the fake hospital bed. My arthritis-worn hands shake, the same hands that signed away my family home and withdrew my retirement savings, now trembling as I process the scope of my sister's deception. The empty house echoes with each step as I walked through rooms that had been my sanctuary for 23 years. Cardboard boxes lined the hallway, labeled in my careful teacher's handwriting. Kitchen, essentials only. Bedroom, small apartment, donate. The movers had taken everything else to storage, furniture I couldn't fit in my new one-bedroom apartment, books collected over 4 decades of teaching, my husband's workshop tools that I couldn't bear to sell but had nowhere to keep. I had paused in the living room where Robert and I had spent countless evenings, where we'd celebrated holidays, where I'd held his hand during his final weeks of cancer treatment. The hardwood floors gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, unmarked now by the furniture that had defined our life together. In 6 hours, I'd hand over the keys to strangers and move into a cramped apartment across town, all because my sister needed experimental cancer treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. My name is Constance Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and this is the story of how my sister's systematic deception had me sell my family home and sacrifice everything I'd worked for. If this situation resonates with your soul, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. The $340,000 from the house sale, combined with the $95,000 I'd withdrawn from my retirement accounts, and the $50,000 from Robert's life insurance, had given Marlene the $485,000 she needed for the clinical trial in Houston. 18 months of treatments, travel expenses, and living costs while she fought the same disease that had taken our mother. But now, staring at these theatrical props, I realized there was no clinical trial, no experimental treatment, no brave battle against cancer. Just an elaborate performance designed to steal everything I had while exploiting my grief over losing Robert to the same disease. The metallic taste of shock fills my mouth as my vision narrows. The fake IV stands look convincing from a distance, but are obviously hollow plastic up close. The monitoring equipment has painted on screens. Even the hospital bed has a manufacturer's label that reads Stage and Theater Supply Company. The sound of a car door slamming makes me look up. Through the garage's side window, I see Marlene getting out of her Honda Civic, moving with the kind of easy grace that should have been impossible for someone who'd supposedly just finished another round of chemotherapy 3 days ago. She looks healthy, not just stable or improving, but genuinely vibrant. Her hair, which had been falling out from treatment, is thick and lustrous. Her skin glows with the kind of vitality I hadn't seen in her for years, not since before her diagnosis 18 months ago. "Connie?" she calls out, her voice strong and clear as she approaches the garage. "I came to help you with the last of the packing. How are you holding up?" I can't speak, can't move. The woman walking toward me bears no resemblance to the frail, suffering sister I'd been supporting through her brave battle with cancer. This is someone who looks like she'd spent the last year and a half at a spa, not in chemotherapy chairs. "Oh, you found the old theater stuff," Marlene says casually, noticing my position on the floor near the fake medical equipment. "I forgot I'd stored some props from the community theater here. We should probably donate those." Theater props. She's calling them theater props, as if that explained everything, as if I hadn't spent the last 18 months believing they were keeping my sister alive. "Marlene," I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. "What is this?" She looks at me with an expression I can't quite read. Part guilt, part calculation, part something that looks disturbingly like relief. "What do you mean?" "The medical equipment. You said it was from the hospital, for your recovery periods at home." I gesture weakly toward the fake IV stand. "You said the insurance company required you to have monitoring equipment between treatments." "Oh, that." She waves her hand dismissively, as if we were discussing a minor misunderstanding about grocery lists. I may have simplified things a bit. You know how you worry, Connie. I didn't want you getting all worked up over details. Details. She's calling the elaborate medical deception that convinced me to sell my home details. I struggled to my feet, using Robert's workbench for support. My hands are shaking so violently, I can barely grip the edge. Simplified what things, Marlene? What exactly did you simplify? For the first time since she'd arrived, uncertainty flickers across her face. But it's quickly replaced by that familiar expression she'd worn during every crisis over the past 45 years. The look that said I was being unreasonable for asking difficult questions when she needed support. Connie, you're obviously upset about the move. This isn't the time for complicated conversations. Let's focus on getting you settled in your new place, and then we can talk about everything else. But I'm already walking toward the fake medical equipment, examining it more closely. The IV bags are empty props. The monitoring screens are painted plastic. Even the hospital bed has a manufacturer's label that reads Stage and Theater Supply Company. How long, Marlene? I ask, my voice growing stronger despite the tremor in my hands. How long have you been lying to me? Marlene's laugh had a brittle quality as she stepped around the fake medical equipment, her movements too fluid for someone who'd supposedly endured months of chemotherapy. Oh, Connie, you're making this so much more dramatic than it needs to be. Yes, I may have embellished some aspects of my situation, but I was desperate. You have to understand the position I was in. Embellished? The word came out as a croak. I gripped Robert's workbench harder, my knuckles white against the worn wood. Marlene, I sold our family home. I liquidated my retirement savings. I spent 18 months believing you were dying. And look how well you handled it all. You were amazing, Connie. So organized, so supportive. I knew I could count on you. She moved closer, reaching out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back instinctively. Count on me for what? To fund your lies? To help family when family needs help. Her voice took on that familiar wounded tone she'd perfected over decades of crises. That's what we do, isn't it? We take care of each other. The garage felt suffocating suddenly, thick with the scent of her perfume and the weight of 18 months of deception. I walked past her toward the driveway, needing air, needing space to think. She followed, her heels clicking against the concrete with the confident stride of someone who'd never been weakened by chemotherapy. Where did the money go, Marlene? I asked, turning to face her in the afternoon sunlight. In the harsh light, she looked even healthier. No pallor, no weight loss, no signs of the ravaging disease that had supposedly been consuming her body. What money? But her eyes shifted away from mine, focusing on something over my shoulder. The $485,000, Marlene, the money from my house, my retirement accounts, Robert's life insurance. Where did it go if you weren't paying for cancer treatment? She sighed, as if I were being tediously persistent about minor details. I had debts, Connie, serious debts. People were threatening me, threatening Tom. I needed to get them off my back. What kind of debts? Another pause, longer this time. Gambling debts. But it wasn't my fault. I had a system, a sure thing. And then the market shifted and everything went wrong. These people don't understand bad luck. Gambling debts. The words hit me like a physical blow, doubling me over slightly as the full scope of her deception became clear. How much? It doesn't matter now. It's handled. Everyone's been paid off, and Tom and I can start fresh. You helped us save our marriage, Connie. You should feel good about that. How much, Marlene? About $180,000. But there were interest charges and fees and... So you stole an extra $300,000 for what? A fresh start? My voice was rising, echoing off the houses in our quiet neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson across the street was watering her garden, pretending not to listen while obviously straining to hear every word. I didn't steal anything. You gave me that money willingly. You wanted to help. Marlene's mask was slipping now, revealing something calculating underneath. Besides, what were you going to do with it? Leave it all to some charity? At least this way it stayed in the family. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. 18 months of terror, of watching my sister supposedly waste away from the same disease that had killed our mother, and she was treating it like a successful business transaction. The doctor visits, I said slowly, pieces clicking into place. Dr. Marcus Webb at Houston Methodist. I drove you to dozens of appointments. Marcus is an actor. Very convincing, don't you think? He specializes in medical roles. She said it with something approaching pride, as if she were discussing a particularly clever home renovation project. An actor? I repeated the words, trying to make them make sense. You hired an actor to pretend to be your oncologist. It was Tom's idea, actually. He has connections in the theater community. Marcus needed the money, and we needed someone believable. Everyone won. Everyone won, except me, sitting in hospital waiting rooms for hours while she pretended to receive chemotherapy. Except me, researching experimental treatments and support groups and dietary supplements that might help her fight a disease she never had. The medical reports you showed me, the test results, the treatment plans. Tom's very good with computers. Graphic design was his major before he went into insurance. She checked her watch, as if this conversation were keeping her from more important appointments. Look, Connie, I know you're upset about the house, but you'll be fine. You're resourceful. You always land on your feet. I stared at her, this stranger wearing my sister's face, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The woman I'd spent 45 years protecting, rescuing, and enabling had never existed. This person in front of me was someone who could watch me destroy my financial security and feel nothing but satisfaction at her own cleverness. Who else knew? I asked. Knew what? About the fake cancer, about the actor, about the gambling debts. Who else was part of this? She hesitated, and I saw the calculation in her eyes as she decided how much truth she could afford to tell. Linda Hartwell knew some of it. She helped coordinate a few things when you called asking questions, and Tom's brother Raymond helped with some of the logistics. Linda Hartwell, my neighbor for 15 years, the woman who'd brought me casseroles during Robert's illness, who'd praised my devotion to Marlene during her brave battle. She'd known I was being systematically defrauded and had helped maintain the lie. Anyone else? Connie, you're making this sound like some vast conspiracy. It was just a few people helping family get through a difficult time. A difficult time. She was calling her elaborate theft of my life savings a difficult time, as if I were the one being unreasonable for objecting to systematic fraud. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from the moving company. Truck loaded, ready for delivery to new address. ETA 4 p.m. In 2 hours, I'd be living in a one-bedroom apartment, starting over at 68 because my sister had decided my financial security was less important than her gambling debts. But for the first time in 18 months, I was seeing clearly. I sat in my new apartment at midnight, surrounded by boxes I couldn't bring myself to unpack. The one-bedroom space felt like a dollhouse after 23 years in our family home, cramped, temporary, wrong. But it was the manila folder spread across my tiny kitchen table that made my hands shake as I examined its contents under the harsh fluorescent light. Medical records, real medical records from Houston Methodist Cancer Center, obtained after a phone call that afternoon to verify Marlene's treatment history. The receptionist had been apologetic but clear. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore, but we have no record of any patient named Marlene Whitmore Chen ever being treated at our facility. No record. 18 months of driving her to appointments, of sitting in waiting rooms while she received chemotherapy, of researching clinical trials and support groups, all based on treatments that never happened at a hospital that had never heard of her. I pulled out the business card Dr. Marcus Webb had given me during our first meeting, when he'd explained Marlene's aggressive treatment protocol with such convincing authority. The card looked professional, embossed lettering, medical credentials, even a photo. But when I'd called the number that evening, it went straight to a voicemail from Marcus Webb, professional actor and medical consultant. Professional actor and medical consultant. The man I'd trusted with my sister's life was advertising his services for realistic medical portrayals and healthcare industry training scenarios. My phone rang, startling me from my examination of the evidence. Linda Hartwell's name appeared on the screen, my neighbor, my friend for 15 years. The woman who'd held my hand through Robert's funeral and praised my strength during Marlene's battle. Constance? I heard about your conversation with Marlene today. Are you all right? The concern in her voice sounded genuine. But now I was listening with different ears. Linda, I need to ask you something directly. Did you know Marlene wasn't really sick? The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. When Linda finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. It's complicated, Constance. Those words, the same ones Walter had used in the previous story, the universal excuse of conspirators caught in their deception. Complicated how? Marlene said she just needed some time to sort out her financial problems. She said it was temporary, that she'd tell you the truth once she got everything handled. You knew from the beginning. It wasn't a question anymore. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. You knew I was selling my house based on lies. We never thought you'd go that far. We thought you'd just help with some medical bills, maybe a few $1,000s. When you started talking about selling the house, we tried to talk Marlene out of it. Tried to talk her out of it? Linda, you could have told me the truth. And destroy your relationship with your sister? Break up her marriage? Ruin her life over some gambling debts? Linda's voice took on a defensive edge. We thought we were protecting everyone. Protecting everyone. Except me, the person actually being defrauded. Who else knew? Just Tom's brother Raymond, and maybe Dr. Webb, but he was just doing a job. Dr. Webb isn't a doctor, Linda. He's an actor. Marlene hired to convince me she was dying. Another long silence. Then, oh Constance, I had no idea it had gone that far. But she had known. They all had known. For 18 months, my entire support system had watched me liquidate my life savings, while maintaining an elaborate lie designed to exploit my deepest fears and strongest loyalties. I hung up and walked to the window of my new apartment, looking out at a parking lot instead of the garden I'd tended for 2 decades. The view was a concrete reminder of what Marlene's difficult time had cost me. Not just money, but the home where Robert and I had built our life together. The security I'd spent 42 years of teaching to create. The future I'd planned for my retirement years. But something else was crystallizing as I stood there in the harsh fluorescent light. The woman who'd been systematically defrauded wasn't the same woman who'd started this journey 18 months ago. That woman had been accommodating, trusting, willing to sacrifice anything for family harmony. This woman, the one standing in a cramped apartment surrounded by evidence of fraud, was someone different. I returned to the kitchen table and opened my laptop, typing insurance fraud attorney into the search engine. If Marlene had collected any insurance money based on her fake diagnosis, if she'd used fraudulent medical documents to obtain funds, if she'd conspired with others to maintain this deception, those weren't family disagreements, those were crimes. The first law firm's website featured a section on elder fraud, with testimonials from clients who'd recovered stolen assets from family members. One quote stood out. The hardest part wasn't proving the fraud, it was accepting that someone I loved had deliberately chosen to destroy my financial security for their own benefit. I picked up my phone and dialed the number. Morrison & Associates. How may I help you? I need to speak with someone about insurance fraud and elder financial abuse, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in months. My sister convinced me to liquidate $485,000 in assets to pay for cancer treatment, and I've discovered she was never sick. I'll connect you with attorney Patricia Morrison. She specializes in these cases. As I waited for the transfer, I looked around my tiny apartment at the boxes containing the remnants of my old life, at the evidence of fraud spread across my table, at the reflection of a woman I barely recognized in the dark window. For 45 years, I'd been Marlene's rescuer, her safety net, her solution to every crisis. But that relationship had been built on my willingness to be exploited, and her skill at manufacturing emergencies that required my sacrifice. That relationship was over. Mrs. Whitmore? This is Patricia Morrison. I understand you've been the victim of family fraud. Tell me what happened. For the first time in 18 months, I was ready to tell the whole truth. The law offices of Morrison & Associates occupied a restored Victorian mansion downtown, its elegant conference room a stark contrast to the cramped apartment I'd left an hour earlier. Patricia Morrison sat across from me, her silver hair and confident demeanor reminding me of the principal I'd once been. Someone who dealt with difficult situations through careful analysis and strategic action. This is one of the most elaborate elder fraud cases I've encountered, Patricia said, reviewing the documents I'd brought. The fake medical professional, the forged documents, the conspiracy involving multiple parties. Your sister didn't just steal from you, Mrs. Whitmore. She orchestrated a sophisticated criminal enterprise. I felt my spine straightening as she spoke, the same way it had during challenging parent conferences when I'd needed to advocate for vulnerable students. What are my legal options? Multiple felony charges. Insurance fraud, if she collected any benefits based on the fake diagnosis. Wire fraud for the electronic transfers. Conspiracy charges for everyone who participated in maintaining the deception. Patricia flipped through the evidence methodically. The amount involved makes this a federal case. Can I recover the money? We can pursue both criminal prosecution and civil recovery. The fact that you have documentation of the fake medical equipment and the actor's business card strengthens your case significantly. She looked up from the papers. But I have to ask, are you prepared for the family fallout? This will likely destroy your relationship with your sister permanently. For the first time in days, I smiled. Patricia, the relationship I thought I had with my sister never existed. The woman I've been protecting for 45 years is someone who could watch me lose my home and feel nothing but satisfaction at her own cleverness. Patricia nodded approvingly. Good. Victims who still hope for reconciliation rarely see justice. What else do you have? I opened my briefcase, the same leather case I'd carried to school board meetings for decades, and pulled out another folder. I hired a private investigator yesterday. Former FBI, specializes in financial crimes. He's already traced some interesting patterns, such as Marlene's gambling activities go back 3 years, not 18 months. She's been systematically losing money at casinos in Louisiana and Mississippi, often traveling there during her supposed treatment periods. The investigator found hotel receipts, casino loyalty card records, even photographs from casino security cameras. Patricia's eyebrows rose. She was gambling while supposedly receiving chemotherapy. Every single time she told me she was too weak from treatment to see me, she was actually at a casino. The investigator also found evidence that she's done this before, smaller scale, but she convinced our cousin Margaret to loan her $15,000 for emergency dental work that never happened. I pulled out another document. There's more. Tom's brother Raymond works for an insurance company. He helped create the fake medical documents using his access to legitimate forms and letterhead. This wasn't just family helping family. It was a coordinated fraud operation. Patricia leaned forward, her legal mind clearly engaged. What about the actor? Marcus Webb has been hired for at least 6 similar schemes over the past 2 years. He specializes in medical consultations for insurance fraud. The investigator found his client list. Apparently, this is a growing niche in the acting community. Unbelievable. Patricia shook her head. What's your goal here, Mrs. Whitmore? Full prosecution? Asset recovery? Both? I thought about the question, feeling the same clarity I'd experienced when making difficult decisions as a principal. I want justice, not revenge, justice. I want Marlene to face consequences for what she's done, and I want to prevent her from doing this to anyone else. That's going to require you to testify, possibly in federal court. Are you prepared for that level of exposure? I spent 42 years standing in front of classrooms, school boards, and parent conferences. I think I can handle a courtroom. I met her gaze steadily. Besides, staying silent is what enabled this fraud to continue for 18 months. I won't be complicit in my own victimization anymore. Patricia smiled. I like your approach. What about the co-conspirators? Linda Hartwell, Raymond Foster? I want them held accountable too. Linda watched me struggle with the emotional trauma of believing my sister was dying. She brought me sympathy cards and casseroles while knowing it was all based on lies she was helping maintain. I felt my voice growing stronger with each word. That's not friendship, it's calculated cruelty. And you're prepared for the community reaction? Small towns don't always respond well to family members pressing criminal charges against each other. I thought about that, about the whispers at the grocery store, the awkward encounters at church, the people who would side with Marlene because family loyalty was supposed to trump everything else. Then I thought about the other elderly women in our community, the ones with savings accounts and trusting hearts, and family members who might be watching this case to see what they could get away with. Let them whisper, I said. I'd rather be known as the woman who fought back than the one who enabled fraud by staying quiet. Patricia gathered the documents into a neat stack. I'll file the criminal complaint tomorrow. The FBI will want to interview you within the week. Are you ready for this process to begin? I stood up, feeling solid and grounded in a way I hadn't experienced since before Robert's death. The tremor that had plagued my hands since Marlene's diagnosis was completely gone. My voice emerged from a deeper place in my chest, resonating with the authority I'd developed through decades of leadership. I've been ready since the moment I found those fake medical props in my garage. The only question is whether Marlene and her conspirators are ready to face the consequences of underestimating a retired principal who spent her entire career protecting people from bullies. Patricia extended her hand. Then let's get started, Mrs. Whitmore. It's time to show your sister what real accountability looks like. As I shook her hand, I realized that for the first time in 18 months, I wasn't just surviving Marlene's crisis. I was actively solving it. The family gathering at my cousin Robert's house felt like a tribunal as I walked through the front door, carrying a manila folder that contained 18 months of documented lies. Marlene sat in the center of the living room sofa, surrounded by relatives who'd spent the past week calling me to express their concern about my decision to involve lawyers in family business. Constance, thank goodness you're here, Cousin Margaret said, rushing to greet me with the kind of forced cheer reserved for interventions. We're all so worried about this misunderstanding between you and Marlene. Surely we can work this out without involving outsiders. Misunderstanding. As if systematic fraud was equivalent to a disagreement over holiday dinner plans. There's no misunderstanding, I said, settling into the armchair across from Marlene with the same composure I'd used during difficult parent conferences. I understand exactly what happened. The question is whether the rest of you are ready to hear the truth. Marlene looked smaller than she had in my garage, her earlier confidence replaced by something that looked almost like fear. But she quickly rallied, reaching for the victim narrative that had served her so well. Connie, please don't do this here. We're family. Whatever problems we have, we can solve them privately. We are family, Marlene, which is exactly why what you did is so devastating. I opened the folder and placed the first document on the coffee table. A letter from Houston Methodist Cancer Center. This confirms that no patient named Marlene Whitmore Chen has ever been treated at their facility. The room fell silent. Cousin Robert leaned forward to read the letter, his face growing pale as he processed the implications. What does this mean? Margaret asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. It means Marlene was never sick, never had cancer, never received any medical treatment. I placed another document on the table. This is Marcus Webb's business card, not as a doctor, but as a professional actor who specializes in medical fraud. An actor? Robert's voice cracked. Marlene, what is she talking about? Marlene's composure was cracking, but she tried one more deflection. You're making this sound so calculated, Connie. I was desperate. I had people threatening me, threatening Tom. I didn't know what else to do. You knew exactly what to do, I said, my voice cutting through her practiced helplessness. You orchestrated an 18-month fraud that convinced me to liquidate $485,000 in assets to pay your gambling debts. Gambling debts? Margaret gasped. Marlene, you told us you'd stopped gambling years ago. I had stopped, but then I had a system, a sure thing, and when it went wrong, these people wouldn't listen to reason. Marlene's mask was slipping completely now, revealing the calculating opportunist underneath. I needed help, and Connie had the money just sitting there. She would have left it all to charity anyway. The audacity of it, the casual assumption that my life savings existed for her convenience, sent a wave of clarity through me. So you decided to steal it by exploiting my terror of losing you the same way we lost Mom. I didn't steal anything. You gave me that money willingly because you thought I was sick. That's not theft. That's just creative problem solving. Creative problem solving. She was describing systematic fraud as creative problem solving, as if the 18 months of terror and financial devastation were simply the cost of her cleverness. Linda Hartwell, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke up. Marlene, you said it was temporary. You said you'd tell her the truth once you got your debts handled. You knew? Robert turned to Linda with shock. You knew she was lying? We all knew, I said, placing another document on the table. Linda, Raymond Foster, Tom. They all participated in maintaining the deception. Linda helped coordinate stories when I called asking questions. Raymond used his insurance company Access to create fake medical documents. Tom hired the actor and managed the logistics. The room erupted in shocked voices, family members turning to each other with accusations and denials. But I remained focused on Marlene, who was finally seeing her carefully constructed world collapse. The FBI is investigating, I continued, my voice carrying over the chaos. Insurance fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, multiple felony charges for everyone involved. The FBI? Marlene's voice was barely a whisper. Connie, you can't be serious. We're family. Yes, we are family. And for 45 years, I've been your safety net, your solution to every crisis, your source of rescue from every consequence. I stood up, feeling my full height and authority. But I'm not your victim anymore. You can't prove I intended to defraud anyone, Marlene said desperately. I was protecting myself from dangerous people. I can prove you hired an actor to pose as a doctor. I can prove you used fake medical equipment to maintain the deception. I can prove you spent the money at casinos while telling me you were too weak from chemotherapy to see me. I placed the final document on the table. Casino security photos showing Marlene gambling during her supposed treatment periods. The evidence is overwhelming. Marlene stared at the photos, her last defense crumbling. Those people would have hurt me, Connie. I had no choice. You had choices. You chose to lie to me for 18 months. You chose to watch me sell our family home. You chose to let me liquidate my retirement savings while you used the money to fund a lifestyle I was too naive to question. What do you want from me? Marlene's voice broke completely. I can't undo what's done. I want you to face the consequences of your choices. I want you to understand that exploiting family loyalty isn't love, it's abuse. And I want you to know that the woman who spent decades rescuing you from your own decisions is done enabling your destructive behavior. Detective Sarah Chen, who'd been waiting in the kitchen, stepped into the living room. Mrs. Whitmore Chen, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, and elder financial abuse. As the handcuffs clicked around Marlene's wrists, she looked at me with something approaching genuine surprise. I never thought you'd actually do it. I know, I replied. That was your mistake. 8 months later, I stood in the community center where I'd volunteered for literacy programs during my teaching years, but today I was here for a different purpose. The room was filled with 23 women, ages ranging from 55 to 82, all of whom had responded to my newspaper ad, Support Group for Elder Financial Abuse Survivors. My name is Constance Whitmore, I began, my voice carrying the confidence that had become second nature since reclaiming my life. I'm 68 years old, and 18 months ago, my sister convinced me to liquidate $485,000 in assets to fund her fake cancer treatment. I'm here because I learned something important. Surviving financial abuse isn't just about recovering money, it's about rebuilding your ability to trust your own judgment. The faces around the circle showed varying degrees of recognition, shame, and hope. Margaret Chen, no relation to my former brother-in-law, raised her hand tentatively. How do you get past the embarrassment? Everyone keeps asking how I could have been so stupid. You weren't stupid, I replied firmly. You were loving. There's a difference. The people who exploit us count on our capacity for love and our reluctance to believe that family members would deliberately harm us. I looked around the circle. The shame belongs to them, not us. The legal proceedings had concluded 3 weeks ago. Marlene pled guilty to multiple felony charges and received 18 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. The restitution order required her to repay $347,000, not the full amount, but enough to allow me to purchase a small 2-bedroom house with a garden where I could rebuild some semblance of the life I'd lost. Linda Hartwell received 6 months of house arrest and community service for conspiracy. Raymond Foster lost his insurance license and faced federal charges for document fraud. Even Marcus Webb, the actor, was prosecuted for his role in multiple fraud schemes across 3 states. What about forgiveness? Asked Dorothy Williams. whose son had stolen her Social Security benefits for 2 years. Everyone keeps telling me I need to forgive him because he's family. I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't the same as enabling. I can forgive Marlene for being desperate enough to steal from me, but I won't pretend that what she did was acceptable or that our relationship can return to what it was. I paused, thinking about the letters Marlene had sent from prison, not apologies, but complaints about the conditions and requests for money for commissary items. Real forgiveness sometimes means accepting that someone you love is capable of terrible choices and protecting yourself accordingly. After the meeting, I walked through downtown Riverside, past the law offices where Patricia Morrison had helped me reclaim my power, past the bank where I'd opened new accounts with strict security protocols, past the small house I'd purchased with the recovered funds. The town looked different now, not because it had changed, but because I was seeing it through different eyes. My phone buzzed with a text from my new neighbor Janet. Garden club meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. Hope you can join us. Janet was 71, a retired nurse whose husband had died the same year as Robert. We'd bonded over shared experiences of widowhood and the challenge of rebuilding social connections after loss. But our friendship was built on honesty rather than obligation, mutual respect rather than family duty. That evening, I sat in my small living room, working on the manuscript I'd started 3 months ago. When Family Becomes the Enemy, a guide to recognizing and surviving elder financial abuse. The book was part memoir, part practical guide, designed to help other women recognize the warning signs I'd missed and navigate the legal system I'd learned to use. The chapter I was writing focused on the difference between family loyalty and family exploitation. True family loyalty, I typed, protects the vulnerable and holds the powerful accountable. False family loyalty demands that victims stay silent to preserve the comfort of those who enabled their abuse. My doorbell rang, interrupting my writing. Through the peephole, I saw Cousin Robert holding a casserole dish, his face uncertain. "Constance? I brought dinner. I was hoping we could talk." I opened the door but didn't invite him in immediately. "About what, Robert?" "About Marlene, about the family, about how we move forward from here." He shifted the casserole dish nervously. "Some people think you were too harsh, pressing criminal charges. They think family problems should stay in the family." "And what do you think?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I think you did what needed to be done. I think the rest of us were cowards for not speaking up when we suspected something was wrong." He met my eyes. "I'm sorry, Constance. We failed you." I stepped aside to let him in, recognizing the difference between someone taking responsibility and someone making excuses. "Thank you for saying that, Robert. It matters." As we shared dinner, he asked about my support group, my book, my new life. "You seem different," he observed, "stronger somehow." I am different. When someone forces you to rebuild from nothing, you learn that you don't need their permission to thrive. I looked around my small but comfortable living room, at the books I was reading, the projects I was pursuing, the life I was creating on my own terms. Marlene thought she was taking my security. Instead, she taught me that my security was never dependent on her approval or anyone else's. Later that night, I returned to my manuscript, writing the final paragraph of the chapter. The greatest gift we can give ourselves after financial abuse is the recognition that we are stronger than we knew, smarter than they assumed, and more capable than they wanted us to believe. Our age is not a vulnerability, it's an advantage. We have decades of experience, wisdom, and resilience that no one can steal from us. I saved the document and closed my laptop, looking out at the small garden I'd planted behind my new house. Tomorrow, I'd tend those plants, facilitate another support group meeting, and continue building a life based on authentic relationships rather than obligatory ones. Marlene had tried to steal my future. Instead, she'd freed me to create a better one.